You have come here because of a title that you already know, contains something that was never fully said to you. Every person has a Judas inside them, and you have felt the warmth of that figure, the approach, the kiss, before you ever understood what it meant. This is not a lesson about a historical figure who sold a teacher for silver 2,000 years ago. This is a lesson about the architecture of your own psyche. And what you are about to see is not a story about betrayal. It is a story about the part of yourself that you have never learned to name. The standard reading, you know it. Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, the one who handed over Jesus to the authorities for 30 pieces of silver, the one whose name has become a synonym for treachery in every language the story has touched. A man so corrupt that Satan himself entered him. A man who, according to the Gospel of John, was a thief, who used to steal from the common purse. A man who went out and hanged himself when he realized what he had done. That is the version you were given. And it is not wrong that reading is standing on the surface of something much deeper. But here is the question that should stop you completely. If Judas was simply a villain, a man of pure evil, why did Jesus choose him? That is the problem. The other 11 were chosen, but so was this one. And the Gospels do not say Jesus made a mistake. They do not say Jesus was deceived. They do not say that Judas slipped through some divine screening process. There is a direct statement in John 6:70 that makes this unavoidable. Jesus says, "Did I not choose you, the 12? And one of you is a devil." He chose him knowing. He chose him deliberately. And that changes everything about how you must read this story. The standard answer tells you that Judas was the traitor, the necessary instrument of evil, the one who had to fall so that the plan could proceed. And that is true at the surface. But it is also incomplete, because if Judas was merely a tool, then the story reduces to puppetry. And you know, somewhere in your bones, that the Bible is not a book of puppetry. The Bible is a map of the human mind, and every character is a part of you. Now consider the name, Judas. Yehuda in Hebrew, it means praise, it means thanksgiving. The very same name that Jacob gave to his fourth son, the one through whom the line of kings would come, the one from whom the Messiah would be born, the same name. Judah, the lion, the praise of God. And here's Judas, carrying the same name, performing the act that leads to the crucifixion. The name that means praise becomes the name that means betrayal. And you have to ask yourself what that tells you about the relationship between these two movements within the same psyche. The English rendering Judas is a flattened version of the original. But the original word in Greek, Judas, is simply the Greek form of Yehuda. So every time the Gospels call him Judas, they are calling him praise. They are calling him thanksgiving. And you have to sit with that contradiction. The betrayer is named praise. The thief is named thanksgiving. And that is not a coincidence. That is the design. If something just shifted in how you read the story, drop the word praise in the comments and tell me which moment landed hardest. Subscribe to keep walking through these stories with us. Each one decodes a different psychological pattern hidden in the text. Here is what changes everything. In the Gospel of Mark, the earliest gospel, the moment of betrayal is described with a word that most translations render as handed over. But the Greek word is paradidomi. It means to deliver, to hand over, to entrust, to commit. It is the same word used throughout the New Testament to describe what God does. God paradidomi his Son. Jesus paradidomai his Spirit. The Father paradidomai the kingdom. The betrayer is doing the same action that God does. He is handing over. He is delivering. And the word carries no inherently negative valence. It is the context that determines the meaning. So when Judas hands over Jesus, he is performing the same verb that defines the entire act of divine surrender. Now watch what happens when you follow this thread into the Gospel of John. In John 13, during the Last Supper, Jesus dips a piece of bread and hands it to Judas, and after Judas takes the bread, Satan enters him. That is the conventional reading. But pay attention to the sequence. Jesus himself hands the bread to Judas. Jesus initiates the moment. And immediately after Judas takes the bread, Jesus says, "What you are going to do quickly." He gives permission. He authorizes the act. The betrayal is commanded in the same moment that the betrayer is possessed. And you have to hold both of those realities at the same time if you want to understand what is happening. Now here is the pivot. The standard reading makes Judas the enemy, the outsider, the one who does not belong. But the deeper reading, the one that the original text itself opens up, is that Judas is the shadow. He is the part of Jesus that must be handed over. He is the part of the self that must die. And if you cannot see this in the story, you cannot see it in yourself. Consider the work of Carl Jung on the shadow. The shadow is not the enemy. The shadow is the part of the psyche that contains everything the conscious self refuses to acknowledge. It is not evil in itself. It is simply the container for what you have rejected, and the shadow always carries the name that you cannot speak. Jung wrote that the shadow is the invisible saurian tail that we all drag behind us, and the moment you try to cut it off, it grows teeth. You see, the shadow demands integration, not elimination. And the story of Judas is the story of what happens when the shadow is integrated the wrong way. But here is something that most people miss. The Gospel of Judas, discovered in the 1970s and published in 2006, offers a completely different reading. In that text, Jesus says to Judas, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Judas is not betraying Jesus. He is liberating him from the body. He is performing the act that allows the Spirit to ascend. And while the Gospel of Judas is a Gnostic text, not included in the canonical Bible, its existence proves that the earliest Christians did not have a single unified view of Judas. There was a tradition in which Judas was not the villain, but the most enlightened of the disciples, the one who understood what had to happen. Now, you might resist that. You might feel that this is a dangerous reading. Good. That discomfort is exactly where we need to go, because the discomfort tells you that you have a stake in keeping Judas as an enemy. And that stake is your own shadow. If what you are hearing started to shift something, stay. This is where that continues. Let us move now into the psychological architecture of the betrayer within you, because you have one. You have always had one, and you have felt it. That voice that whispers to you on the night before a deadline, when you decide not to do the work. That impulse to say something cutting to someone you love when you are feeling small. That moment when you look at your own reflection and recognize someone who is capable of actions you would never admit. That is your Judas. And here is the layer that most people never reach. The psychological function of the Judas figure is not to destroy. It is to force the confrontation between who you think you are and who you actually are. Without the betrayal, Jesus does not go to the cross. Without the cross, there is no resurrection. Without the shadow that you are refusing to face, there is no transformation. You cannot reach the Easter morning of your own psyche without the Good Friday of being handed over to what you most fear. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has shown that the brain's ability to create a coherent sense of self depends on a constant process of integration between conscious and non-conscious material. What you call I is actually a narrative constructed from fragments that your brain has learned to exclude. And the parts you exclude do not disappear. They accumulate. They form a shadow self that operates beneath your awareness. And that shadow self, your inner Judas, is always approaching with a kiss. Now think about the kiss itself. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas approaches Jesus and greets him with a kiss. The Greek word is philema, a gesture of affection, the same word used for the kiss of greeting among believers. It is the sign of love that becomes the sign of betrayal. And that is the deepest psychological truth of the story. Your shadow never arrives as an enemy. It always arrives as a friend. The temptation to betray yourself never comes as an obvious attack. It comes as a familiar comfort. It comes as a kiss. If this made sense instantly, it is because you already knew. Some people hear this and ignore it. You are not that person. Now, here is where it breaks. In the Gospel of Matthew, after Judas realizes what he has done, he returns the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. He confesses, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." He throws the money into the temple, and then he goes out and hangs himself. But in the Acts of the Apostles, the account is different. It says that Judas bought a field with the reward of his wickedness, and that he fell headlong, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. Two different accounts of the same death. Two different endings to the same story. and both of them describe a man destroyed by his own shadow. But there is a third ending, one that is rarely discussed. In some early Christian traditions, Judas did not die at all. He lived on as a wanderer, carrying the weight of his act for the rest of his life. And that tradition contains a different kind of truth. Sometimes the betrayal does not kill you. Sometimes you wake up the next morning and you have to live with what you did. And that is a more frightening thought than any dramatic death. Now here is the convergence. The standard reading says, Judas is evil and separate from you. The deeper reading says, Judas is a necessary part of the pattern. And the synthesis is this: the relationship between Jesus and Judas is not a relationship between two historical figures. It is a relationship between two parts of the same self, the part that is willing to die and the part that is willing to hand over, the part that knows it must be sacrificed and the part that enacts the sacrifice, and you cannot have one without the other. Write this in the comments. I am awake. Tell me what city you are watching from, and if you have already felt the presence of your own Judas, write what it whispered to you last night. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that Judas received 30 pieces of silver. This amount, exactly 30 shekels, is not an arbitrary number. It is the price of a slave in Exodus 21:32. It is the valuation of a life that has been reduced to property. And here is the psychological equivalent. Your inner Judas always has a price. The question is never whether you have a price. The question is what that price is. What would it take for you to hand over what is most precious to you? What would it take for you to betray your own deepest truth? Is it a promotion? Is it approval? Is it safety? Is it comfort? Is it the fear of being alone? The 30 pieces of silver are different for every person, but the mechanism is the same. Now consider the kiss again, but this time not from the perspective of the betrayer, from the perspective of the one who is betrayed. Jesus allows the kiss. He does not turn away. He does not resist. He says, "Friend, do what you have come to do." The word friend in Greek is heteros, which means companion, comrade, associate. He calls the betrayer friend, and that is the moment that should stop you completely. Because the one who is betrayed does not see the betrayer as an enemy. He sees him as a friend. And that is the most radical psychological insight in the entire story. The part of you that you have called your enemy, the part of you that you have tried to cut off, the part of you that you have refused to acknowledge is not your enemy at all. It is your friend. The problem is that you do not know how to recognize it. Now watch what happens when you apply this to your own life. Think about the last time you did something that you later regretted. The moment before you acted, there was a voice. It was not a loud voice. It was a soft voice. It came as a kiss. It said, "Just this once." It said, "No one will notice." It said, "You deserve this." It said, "What choice do you really have?" That voice was your Judas, and you let it kiss you. And then the act was done, and you woke up the next morning in the field of your own spilled intestines, wondering how you got there. But here is the layer that changes everything. That voice is not your enemy. It is the part of you that is trying to survive. It is the part of you that knows that the crucifixion is coming, and it is terrified. It wants to avoid the cross at any cost. It wants to hold on to the old self. It wants to keep the body alive, even if the spirit must die. And that is the tragedy of the shadow. It is not evil. It is just afraid. And its fear makes it do terrible things. The psychological equivalent of this is what happens when you refuse to make a decision that you know you must make. You stay in the job that is killing you because you are afraid of the unknown. You stay in the relationship that is draining you because you are afraid of being alone. You keep the habit that is destroying you because you are afraid of withdrawal. And every day you hand yourself over to a smaller version of who you could be. That is your Judas. That is the kiss. And it happens every single day. Now let us go back to the original language. The word Iscariot, the surname attached to Judas, is uncertain. It could come from the Hebrew Ish-Kerioth, which means man of Kerioth, a town in Judah, but there is another possibility. It could come from the Aramaic Ishkaria, which means the liar, or it could come from the Aramaic Iskara, which means the one who hands over. The very name carries the tension. He is the man from a place, and he is the one who betrays, and he is the one who delivers. And you have to ask yourself what your own name reveals about the role you play in your own life. Here's something that most people never consider. In the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus says that one of the 12 will betray him, each of the disciples asks, "Is it I?" Not, "Is it Judas?" Not, "Is it Peter?" Not, "Is it John?" Each one says, "Lord, is it I?" The Greek is meter ego eimi, which literally means not at all I am. The question is framed in a way that expects a negative answer, and yet it is asked. Every single disciple asks whether he is the betrayer, and that means that every single disciple had the capacity for it. The text is telling you that you cannot look at Judas and say, "I am not like him," because you have the same capacity. The only difference is the circumstances. If you are seeing yourself in this, if the parable just stopped being about someone else and started being about you, that is the recognition we are after. Subscribe before the next chapter, because what comes next changes how you read every Bible story you thought you knew. Now consider the name of Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew. It means the Lord saves. And the one who hands him over is named Yehudah, praise. So the story is about salvation and praise and the relationship between them. Without the handing over, there is no salvation. Without the praise, the salvation cannot be acknowledged. The betrayer and the saved are bound together in a single movement of the psyche, and this is where the psychological science comes in. The work of I.N. McGilchrist on the divided brain shows that the left hemisphere, which specializes in analysis and fragmentation, tends to treat the world as a collection of discrete objects. It separates things. It categorizes. It identifies enemies. The right hemisphere, which specializes in synthesis and connection, sees relationships, patterns, wholeness. The conventional reading of Judas is a left hemisphere reading. It fragments the story into good and evil, friend and enemy, saved and damned. The deeper reading, the one that the original text demands, is a right hemisphere reading. It sees that the betrayer and the betrayed are part of a single pattern. It sees that the kiss is not an act of enmity, but an act of intimacy. And that requires a kind of perception that most people have been trained out of. Now here's the synthesis. You are not going to arrive at a resolution. The text does not resolve the tension. The tension is the text, and that is the design. The Bible is not a book that gives you answers. It is a book that forces you to hold contradictions. And the moment you can hold the contradiction without needing to resolve it, you have grown. The moment you can look at Judas and see both the betrayer and the one who enables salvation, you have stepped into a different kind of consciousness. If this opens something, the next video closes it in a way you will not expect. Now let us return to the original question. What is Judas? And you already know that you cannot answer it with a single word, because the answer depends on which layer you are standing on. On the surface, he is the betrayer. That is the standard answer. And it is true he handed over Jesus to be killed. He took money for it. He participated in an act of violence that led to an execution. That is not ambiguous. But beneath that surface, he is the one who performed the act that made the resurrection possible. And that is also true. Without the betrayal, there is no trial. Without the trial, there is no crucifixion. Without the crucifixion, there is no death. And without the death, there is no resurrection. So the question is not whether Judas is good or evil. The question is whether you can hold both realities at the same time without breaking. And here is the personal landing. Look at your own life. Think about the most painful thing that has ever happened to you, the betrayal that broke you, the loss that destroyed you, the failure that humiliated you. Now ask yourself this question. What came after it? What emerged from the wreckage that would not have emerged otherwise? What did you learn? What did you become? The answer is not always visible immediately. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes a lifetime. But the pattern is consistent. The kiss always precedes the transformation. Now say this out loud. I have a Judas. His name is something I already know, and I have been refusing to look at him. But I am ready now. That is the practice. Not to eliminate the Judas, not to cast him out, but to recognize him, to name him, and to understand what he is trying to do. Because when you understand him, he stops being a threat. He becomes what he always was, a friend who did not know how to tell you the truth. The Gospel of John records that after Judas took the bread, Satan entered him. But the Greek word for entered is eisarkomai, which means to go into, to come into, to penetrate. And the same word is used in John 20 when Jesus appears to the disciples through locked doors and comes into the room. So the same verb describes the entry of the enemy and the entry of the risen one, and that is the final layer. The same door that opens for the shadow opens for the light. The same openness that allows the betrayal allows the resurrection. You cannot have one without the other. This is just the surface. What comes next changes everything. And now, the return. Remember the question we started with. What is Judas? And you hear it differently now, because you know that the answer cannot be captured in a single sentence. It is not a noun. It is a relationship. It is the relationship between who you are and who you refuse to be. It is the relationship between the part that wants to live and the part that knows it must die. It is the relationship between the kiss and the cross. And every person who has ever lived has stood in that garden. Every person has felt the approach of that figure in the dark. Every person has had to decide what to do with that kiss. And now you cannot read the story the old way. Not because the text has changed, not because you have been given new information that invalidates the old reading, but because you now know something that you did not know before. You know that the betrayer is not the enemy. The betrayer is the part of you that is doing what must be done, whether you have the courage to do it consciously or not. And the question is no longer whether you have a Judas. The question is whether you will recognize him when he comes, because he always comes as a friend, and he always comes with a kiss. And that word was never just a name. It was a revelation. And once you see it, you do not go back. Consider the betrayal from a different angle now, one that is rarely explored in the literature, whether theological or psychological. The Gospel of John is the only gospel that gives us a specific timeline for the betrayal. It tells us that after Judas took the bread, he went out immediately. And the text says, "And it was night." 3 words in Greek, and a nix. But in the Greek, the word order is emphatic. It is not simply that it was nighttime, it is that the night itself was the condition. The betrayal does not happen during the day. It does not happen in the light of consciousness. It happens in the darkness, where you cannot see what you are doing, and every betrayal you have ever committed has happened in the same kind of night. Not a literal night, a psychological night, a moment when you were not fully present, a moment when you were operating on autopilot, a moment when the light of awareness had gone out and you were moving through the dark. Now, here is the neuroscience that confirms this pattern. The work of Antonio Damasio on the somatic marker hypothesis shows that your emotional system makes decisions before your conscious mind is even aware that a decision is being made. Your body knows what you are about to do before your brain can articulate it. And the moment of betrayal is exactly that. You feel the impulse, you feel the shift, you feel the alignment with the dark, and then your conscious mind catches up and tries to justify it. That is the kiss. The kiss is the moment when the body has already made the decision and the mind has not yet caught up to what has happened. Now here is the philosopher who reached this conclusion centuries before the neuroscience existed. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the shadow, but he also wrote about something he called the dark night of the soul. And in his work on alchemy, he identified a stage called the nigredo, the blackening. It is the stage where everything that was solid dissolves. All your certainties collapse. All your identities fall apart. And it is in that stage, the nigredo, that the transformation begins. The betrayal is the nigredo. It is the moment when you fall apart so that you can be put back together. And Judas, in this reading, is not the enemy. He is the agent of the nigredo. He is the one who brings the night. But here is something that most people never consider. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that Judas was filled with remorse. The Greek word is metamelomai, which is different from metanoia. Metanoia means a change of mind, a transformation of perspective, a fundamental shift in how you see reality. Metamelomai means regret, a change of feeling, a desire to undo what was done. And the difference between these 2 Greek words is the difference between someone who has been transformed by the shadow and someone who has simply been crushed by it. Metanoia leads to Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times and then became the rock on which the church was built. Metamelomai leads to Judas, who returned the money and then hanged himself. The same act, the same failure, the same collapse, but 2 different responses. And the difference is not in what they did. The difference is in what they believed about what they did. Now let me read that verse again with the original Greek in mind. Peter denies Jesus. He weeps bitterly. He does not kill himself. He stays alive. He stays in the story. He becomes the leader. Judas returns the money. He confesses. He kills himself. He exits the story. And the question that the text leaves open is this: what would have happened if Judas had believed that he could be forgiven? Because the difference between Peter and Judas is not a difference in the gravity of their sin. Peter denied knowing Jesus. He cursed. He swore. He pretended he had never met the man. Judas handed him over to be killed. Objectively, Judas's act is far worse. And yet Peter becomes a saint, and Judas becomes a synonym for evil. And that is not because of what they did, it is because of what they believed about what they did. Peter believed that he could be restored. Judas did not. Now here is the psychological equivalent. You have a failure in your past that you have never forgiven yourself for. It may be small, it may be enormous, but it keeps you trapped in a loop. Every time you think about it, you feel the same shame, you feel the same hopelessness, you replay the same scene, and in every replay you end up in the same field, alone with the same rope. That is metamelomai. That is regret without transformation. And the text is telling you that regret is not enough. Regret keeps you in the past. Metanoia sets you free. Now here's something that the theologians rarely discuss. In the original Greek of the Gospel of Matthew, when Judas says, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood," the word for sin is not the same word that is used elsewhere. The word is hamartia, which literally means missing the mark. It is an archery term. It means the arrow did not hit the target. And when Judas says this, he is not using the word that means moral transgression. He is using the word that means failure, error, a mistake in aim. And that changes everything. Because Judas is not saying, "I am evil." He is saying, "I missed. I aimed at something and I did not hit it." And that is a fundamentally different confession. It is a confession that contains the possibility of learning. Because if you missed, you can aim again. If you are evil, there is no return. Now, watch what happens when you apply this to your own life. Think about the failure that you have been calling a sin. Think about the mistake that you have been using to define yourself. Now ask yourself this question: was it a sin or was it a miss? Was it a fundamental corruption of your nature, or was it an arrow that went where you did not intend? The answer matters, because the answer determines whether you can try again or whether you are condemned to stay in the field. And this is where the synthesis deepens, because the text does not tell us whether Judas's metamelomai could have become metanoia. The text leaves it open. It says he threw the money into the temple and went out and hanged himself. But it does not say that God rejected him. It does not say that Jesus cursed him. It says that Jesus called him friend. The only judgment that appears in the text is Judas's own judgment. And that is the most terrifying psychological insight of the entire story. The judgment that condemns you is your own. There is no external judge. There is only the voice inside that decides whether you are beyond repair or whether you are simply a person who missed the mark and can try again. And here's the final convergence. The word for repentance in the New Testament is metanoia, which, as we said, means a change of mind. But the word for repentance in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, is teshuvah. And teshuvah does not mean regret. It does not mean a change of feeling. It means to return. It means to go back to the place where you went wrong and to choose differently. And the root of teshuvah is the same root as the word for answer, for response, for the thing that comes after the question. So repentance, in the original Hebrew framework, is not a feeling of guilt. It is a return to the fork in the road where you took the wrong path, and this time you take the other one. And that is precisely what Judas could not do. He could not return. He could not go back to the moment and choose differently. He stayed in the field. He stayed in the regret. He stayed in the night. But here is the thing that the story refuses to tell you. The story does not say that Judas is damned. It says that he went out and hanged himself, and then it moves on. The narrative does not pause to condemn him. It does not dwell on his fate. It continues toward the cross. And that is the most psychologically sophisticated aspect of the entire text. The story does not stop to resolve the Judas problem. It leaves him hanging, literally, and moves on. Because the story is not about Judas. It is about what Judas made possible. And the moment you spend all your time on the betrayer is the moment you miss the resurrection. This is not a coincidence. This is design. And this is where the psychological meaning of the text reaches its full weight. Because in your own life, the same dynamic is operating. There is a part of you that has been exiled. There is a part of you that you have labeled as evil. There is a part of you that you have cast out of your own story. And as long as you are frozen in judgment of that part, you cannot move forward. You cannot get to the resurrection. You are stuck at the betrayal. You are staring at the field where the figure hangs, and you cannot look away. And the text is telling you to look away, to turn toward the cross, to turn toward what is being built, to turn toward what the betrayal is making possible. And that requires a kind of courage that is not common. It requires the courage to leave your judgment behind, to stop defining yourself by your worst moment, to stop defining Judas by his last act, to understand that the same hands that handed over the Son of Man also held the bread that became his body. The same lips that kissed the cheek of the teacher also spoke the words that set the entire story in motion. And that is the paradox that the text refuses to collapse. So here is the question you cannot answer simply. What is Judas? And the only honest answer is that Judas is the part of every human being that does what must be done, even when it breaks the heart. He is the part that acts when no one else will. He is the part that moves when everyone else is frozen. He is the part that makes the choice that nobody wants to make. And he is the part that cannot forgive itself for having made it. You have felt this. You have been the one who had to do the thing that everyone else would silently condemn. You have been the one who had to speak the truth that everyone else was pretending not to see. You have been the one who had to end the relationship that everyone else insisted was working. You have been the one who had to hand over what you loved so that something new could be born. And in that moment, you were Judas. And you felt the weight of that identity. And you felt the judgment of everyone who could not understand what you were doing. And you felt the shame. And you wondered if you would ever be able to return. And the text is saying to you now, through the silence of its narrative, that you are not condemned. The judgment you are carrying is your own. The field where you are standing is the one you built, and the rope you are holding is the one you wove out of your own story. You are not damned by God. You are damned by a reading of the text that is shallow, incomplete, and psychologically primitive. And the moment you step into the deeper reading, the one that holds both the betrayal and the salvation in the same frame, the rope falls from your hands. Drop the word return in the comments if you have just named a part of yourself you have been keeping in the field. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because the story does not end with the field. It ends with what rises from it, and that word was never a name, it was a mirror. And the face you see in that mirror is your own. And now you have to decide what to do with what you have seen, because once you see it, you do not go back. You cannot unlearn the fact that the betrayer and the saved are the same person. You cannot unlearn the fact that the kiss and the cross are the same gesture. You cannot unlearn the fact that without the night there is no dawn. And the story, when you read it this way, does not end with a figure hanging from a tree. It ends with an empty tomb. And the question that remains is not whether the betrayer was evil. The question is whether you will let him be part of the story or whether you will leave him in the field, alone, with the rope that you put in his hands.